Howdy, I'm Elisa. The rain is falling outside. I shall be reading you a short story called Madame Crowl's Ghost. I'm an old woman now, and I was but 13 my last birthday. The night I came to Applewell House, my aunt was the housekeeper there, and a sort of one-horse carriage was down at Lixo to take me and my box up to Applewell. I was a bit frightened by the time I got to Lixo, and when I saw the carriage and horse, I wished myself back again with my mother at Hazeldell. I was crying when I got into the shay. That's what we used to call it. And old John Mulberry, that drove it, and was a good-natured fellow, bought me a handful of apples at the Golden Lion to cheer me up a bit. And he told me that there was a currant cake, and tea and pork chops waiting for me, all hot, in my aunt's room at the great house. It was a fine moonlight night, and I ate the apples looking out over the shay window. It was a shame for gentlemen to frighten a poor, foolish child like I was. I sometimes think it might be tricks. There was 2 of them on the tap of the coach house beside me, and they began to question me after nightfall, when the moon rose, where I was going. Well, I told them it was to wait on Dame Arabella Crowl. Dame Arabella Crowl of Applewell House, nearby Lixo. "Ho, then," says one of them, "you'll not be long there." And I looked at him as much as to say, why not? For I'd spoken out when I told them where I was going, as if 'twas something clever I had to say. "Because," says he, "and don't you for the life tell no one, only watch her and see she'll possess. She's possessed by the devil, and more'n half a ghost. Have you got a Bible?" "Yes, sir," says I, for my mother put my little Bible in my box, and I knew it was there. And by the same token, though the print's too small for my old eyes, I have it in my press to this hour. As I looked up at him, saying, "Yes, sir," I thought I saw him winking, as at his friend, but I could not be sure. "Well," says he, "be sure you put it under your bolster every night. It'll keep the old girl's claws off ye." And I got such a fright when he said that, you wouldn't fancy. And I'd like to ask him a lot about the old lady, but I was too shy, and he and his friend began talking together about their own concerns, and dowly enough I got down, as I told you, at Lixo. My heart sank as I drove into the dark avenue. The trees stands very thick and big, as old as the old house, almost, and 4 people, with their arms out and fingertips touching, barely guards around some of them. Well, my neck was stretched out on the window, looking for the first view of the great house, and all at once we pulled up in front of it. A great white and black house it was, with great black beams across the right up it, gables looking out, as white as a sheet, to the moon, and the shadows of the trees, 2 or 3 up and down upon the front. You could count the leaves on them, and all the little diamond-shaped window panes glimmering in the great hall window, and great shutters in the old-fashioned, hinged on the wall outside, bolted across all the rest of the windows in front, for there was but 3 or 4 servants and the old lady in the house, and most of the rooms were locked up. My heart was in my mouth when I said the journey was over, and this, the great house before me, and I saw near my aunt that I never said did till no, and Dame Crowl that I was come to wait upon, and was offered a third on already. My aunt kissed me in the hall and brought me to my room. She was tall and thin, with a pale face and black eyes, and long thin hands with black mittens on. She was past 50, and her word was short, but her word was law. I have no complaints to make of her, and she was a hard woman. And I think she would have been kinder to me if I bid her sister's children in place. If I had been her sister's child in place of her brother's. But all that's no consequence now. The squire, his name was Mr. Crowl. He was Dame Crowl's grandson, came down there by way of seeing that the old lady was well treated, about twice or thrice in the year. I said him but twice all the time I was at Applewale House. I can't say she was well taken care of, notwithstanding. But that was because my aunt and Meg Wyvern, that was her maid, had a conscience and did their duty by her. Mrs. Wyvern, Meg Wyvern, my aunt called her to herself, and Mrs. Wyvern to me, was a fat, jolly lass of 50, a good height and a good breadth, always good-humoured and walked slow. She had fine wages, but she was a bit stingy, and kept all her fine clothes under lock and key, and wore mostly a twilled chocolate cotton with red and yellow and green sprigs and balls on it, and it lasted wonderful. She never gave me now, not the valley or brass thimble, all the time I was there, but she was good-humoured and always laughing, and she told no end of praise of her tea, and seeing me so sackless and dowly, she roused me up with my laughing and her laughing and stories. I think I liked her better than my aunt. Children is so taken with a bit of fun or a story, though my aunt was very good to me, but a hard woman about some things, and silent always. My aunt took me into a bedchamber that I might rest myself a bit while she was setting the tea in her room, but first she patted me on the shoulder and said I was a tall lass of my years and had spired up well, and asked me if I could do plain work and stitching, and she looked in my face and said I was like my father, her brother, that was dead and gone, and she hoped I was a better Christian, what not to that lens. It was a hard saying the first time I set my foot in her room, I thought. When I went into the next room, the housekeeper's room, very comfortable, yak oak all round, there was a fine fire blazing away, with coals and peat and wood all in low together, and tea on the table, and hot cake, and smoking meat, and there was Mrs. Wyvern, fat, jolly, and talking away, more in an hour than my aunt would in a year. While I was still at my tea, my aunt went upstairs to see Madame Crowl. She's gone up to see that old Judith Squales is awake, says Mrs. Wyvern. Judith sits with Madame Crowl when me and Mrs. Shutters. And that was my aunt's name, is all. She's a troublesome old lady. You'll have to be sharp with her, or she'll be into the fire, or out the window. She goes on wires, she does, old though she be. How old, ma'am? Says I. 93, her last birthday. And that's 8 months gone, says she. And she laughs. And don't be asking questions about her before your aunt. Mind, I tell you. Just take her as you find her, and that's all. And what's to be my business about her, please, ma'am? Says I. About the old lady. Well, says she, your aunt, Mrs. Shutters, will tell you that, but I suppose you'll have to sit in the room with your work, and see she's at no mischief, and let her amuse herself with the things on the table, and let her food or drink, get her food or drink, as she calls for it, and keep her out of mischief. Ring the bell hard if she's troublesome. Is she deaf now? No, nor blind, says she, as sharp as a needle, but she's gone quite orpy and can't remember naught rightly. And Jack the Giant Killer, or Goody Two-Shoes, will please her as well as the King's Court, or the affairs of the nation. And what did the little girl go away for, ma'am? That went on Friday last. My aunt wrote to my mother she was to go. Yes, she's gone. What for? Says I again. She didn't answer Mrs. Shutters, I do suppose, says she. I don't know. Don't be talking. The aunt can't abide a talking child. And please, ma'am, is the old lady well in health? Says I. There ain't no harm to ask that, says she. She's torfin a bit lately, but better this week past. I dare say she'll last out 100 years yet. Ish, here's your aunt coming down the passage. In comes my aunt and begins talking to Mrs. Wyvern and I, beginning to feel more comfortable and at home, like was walking about the room looking at this thing and that. There was pretty old china things on the cupboard, and pictures against the wall, and there was a door open in the wainscot, and I see a queer old leather jacket with straps and buckles to it, and sleeves as long as the bedpost hanging up inside. What's that you're at, child? Says my aunt, sharp enough, turning about when I thought she was least minding. What's that in your hand? This, ma'am, says I, turning about with the leather jacket. I don't know what it is, ma'am. Pale as she was, the red came up in her cheeks and her eyes flashed with anger, and I think only she had 6 steps to take between her and me. She'd have guv me a scissor. But she did give me a shake by the shoulder, and she plucked the thing out of my hand, and says she, While ever you stay here, don't you meddle with nought that don't belong to ye. Then she hung it up on the pin that was there, and shut the door with a bang and locked it fast. Mrs. Wyvern was lifting up her hands and laughing all this time, quietly in her chair, rolling herself a bit in it, as she used when she was kinking. The tears was in my eyes, and she winked at my aunt, and said she, drying her own eyes with that wet with laughing, Tut, the child meant no harm. Come here to me, child. It's only a pair of crutches for lame ducks, and ask us no questions, mind, and we'll tell you no lies. And come here and sit down, drink a mug of beer before you go to your bed. My room, mind you, was upstairs next to the old lady's. Mrs. Wyvern's bed was near hers in her room, and I was to be ready at call, if need should be. The old lady was in one of her tantrums that night, and part of the day before. She used to take fits of the sulks. Sometimes she would not let them dress her, and other times she would not let them take her clothes off. She was a great beauty, they said, in her day, but there was no one but Applewell that remembered her in her prime, and she was dreadful fond of dresses, and had thick silks and stiff satins and velvets and laces and all sorts, enough to set up 7 shops at the least. All her dresses was old-fashioned and queer, but worth a fortune. Well, I went to my bed. I lay for a while awake, for things was new to me, and I think the tea was in my nerves too, for I wasn't used to it, except now and then on holiday, or the like, and I heard Mrs. Wyvern talking, and I listened with my hand to my ear, but I could not hear Mrs. Crowl, and I don't think she said a word. There was great care took of her. The people at Applewell knew that when she died they would every one get the sack. The situation was well paid and easy. The doctor came twice a week to see the old lady, and you may be sure they all did as he bid them. One thing was the same every time. They were never to cross or front her, any way, but to humour and please her in every way. So she lay in her clothes all that night, and next day, not a word, she said. I was at my needlework all that day, in my own room, except when I went down to my dinner. I would have liked to see the old lady, and even to hear her speak, but she might as well have been in London at the time for her. When I had my dinner, my aunt sent me out for a walk for an hour. I was glad when I came back. The trees were so big and the place so dark and lonesome, and it was a cloudy day, and I cried a deal, thinking of home while I was walking alone there. That evening, the candles being alight, I was sitting in my room, and the door was open into Madame Crowl's chamber, where my aunt was. It was, then, for the first time I heard that, what I suppose was the old lady talking. It was a queer noise, like, I couldn't well say which, a bird or a beast, only to have a bleating sound in it, and was very small. I pricked my ears to hear all I could, but I could not make out one word she said. My aunt answered, "The evil one can't hurt no one, ma'am, out the Lord permits." When the same queer voice from the bed says something more that I couldn't make head nor tail on, my aunt made answers again. "Let them pull faces, ma'am, and say what they will. If the Lord be for us, who can be against us?" I kept listening with my ear turned to the door, holding my breath, but not another word or sound came in from the room. In about 20 minutes, as I was sitting in the table, looking at the pictures in the old Aesop's fables, I was aware of something moving at the door, and looked up. I said, my aunt's face looking in at the door, and her hand raised. "Hush," says she, very soft, and comes over to me on tiptoe, and she says in a whisper, "Thank God, she's asleep at last, and don't you make no noise till I come back, for I'm going down to take my cup of tea, and I'll be back no. Me and my Mrs. Wife, and she'll be sleeping in the room, and you can run down when we come up, and Judith will give ye your supper in my room." And with that, away she goes. I kept looking at the picture book, as before, listening every now and then, but there was no sound, not a breath, that I could hear. I began whispering in the pictures and talking to myself to keep my heart up, for I was growing feared in that big room. And at last up I got, and began walking about the room, looking at this and peeping at that, to amuse my mind. You'll understand. At last, what should I do but peeps in Madame Crowl's bedchamber? The ground chamber it was, with a great four-poster, with flowered silk curtains as tall as the ceiling, and folding down on the floor and drawn close all round, there was a looking-glass, the biggest I ever saw before, and the room was a blaze of light. I counted 22 wax candles all alight. Such was her fancy, and no one dared say her nay. I listened at the door, and gaped and wondered all round. When I heard there was not a breath, and did not see so much as a stir in the curtains, I took heart, and I walked into the room on tiptoe, and looked round again. Then I takes a keek of myself in the big glass. At last came in my head, why couldn't I have a keek at the old lady herself in the bed? You'd think me a fool, if you knew half how I longed to see Dame Crowl, and I thought to myself, if I didn't peep now, I might wait many a day before I got so good a chance again. Well, my dear, I came to the side of the bed, and curtains being closed, and my heart almost failed me, but I took courage, and I slipped my finger in between the thick curtains, and then my hand, so I waits a bit, but all was still as death. So softly I draws the curtain, and there, sure enough, they stood before me, stretched out like the painted lady on the tombstone in Lixo Church, the famous Dame Crowl of Applewale House. There she was, dressed out, You never said the like in those days. Satin and silk, and scarlet and green, and gold and piped lace. Ah, Jen, it was a sight. The big powdered wig, half as high as herself, was the top on her head. Wow, was ever such wrinkles. And her old baggy throat all powdered white, and her cheeks rouged, and mouse-skin eyebrows Mrs. Wyvern used to stick on, and there she lay ground and stark with a pair of clocked silk hose on, and heels to her shoes, tall as ninepins. Look, but her nose was crooked and thin, and half the whites of her eyes was open. She used to stand, dressed as she was, giggling and dribbling about before the looking-glass, with a fan in her hand and a big nosegay in her bodice. Her wrinkled little hands were stretched down by her sides, and such long nails all cut into points. I never said in my days. What the fuck is Sid? I'm sorry, I just have to pause here. I'm not editing this out, but this, like, what if I'm reading from the public domain, man? It's okay. Could it ever have been the fashion for grit folk to wear their fingernails so? Well, I think you'd have been frightened yourself if you'd have said such a sight. I couldn't let go the curtain, nor move an inch, nor take my eyes off her. My very heart stood still. In an instant she opens her eyes, and up she sits, and spins herself round and down with a clack on the two tall heels on the floor, facing me, ogling in my face with the two great glassy eyes, and a wicked simper with the old wrinkled lips and lang false teeth. Well, a corpse and a natural thing. But this was the dreadfulest sight I ever saw. She had her fingers straight out, pointing at me, and her back was crooked round again with rage. Says she, "You little limb, what for did you say I killed the boy? I'll tickle ye till you're stiff." If I'd have thought an instant, I'd have turned about and run, but I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I backed from her as soon as I could, and she came clattering after, like a thing on wires, and her fingers pointing to my throat, and she making all the time a sound with her tongue like ziz, ziz, ziz. I kept backing and backing as quick as I could, and her fingers was only a few inches away from my throat. I felt I'd lose my wits if she touched me. I went back this way, right into the corner, and I gave a yellock. You'd think soul and body was parting, and that minute my aunt, from the door, calls out with a blare, and the old lady turns round on her, and I turns about, ran through my room, and down the back stairs, as hard as my legs could carry me. I cried hearty, I can tell you. When I got down to the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Wyvern laughed a deal when I told her what happened, but she changed her key when she heard the old lady's words. "Say them again," says she. So I told her. "You little limb, what for did you say I killed the boy? I'll tickle ye till you're stiff." "And did you say she killed the boy?" she says. "Not I, ma'am," says I. Judith was always up with me after that, when the two elder women was away from her. I I would have jumped out a window rather than stay alone in the same room with her. It was about a week after. As well as I could remember, Mrs. Wyvern, one day when me and her was alone, told me a thing about Madame Crowl that I did not know before. She, being young and a great beauty, full 70 years before, had married Squire Crowl of Applewell. but he was a widower and had a son about 9 years old. There never was terrible tidings of this boy after my one morning. No one could say where he went to. He was allowed too much liberty, and used to be off in the morning one day to the keeper's cottage and breakfast with him, and away to the warren, not home mayhap, till evening, and another time down to the lake, bathe there, and spend the day fishing there, or paddling about in the boat. Well, no one could say what was going with him, gone with him, only this, that his hat was found by the lake, under the hawthorn that grows there, in this to this day, and 'twas thought he was drowned bathing, the squire's son, by his second marriage, by this Madam Crowl, that lived so dreadful long, came in for the estates. It was his son, the old lady's grandson, Squire Sheridan's Crowl, that owned the estates at the time I came to Applewell. There was a deal of talking long before my aunt's time about it, and 'twas said the stepmother knew more than she was like to let out, and she managed her husband, the old squire, with a white death and flatteries. And as the boy was never seen before any more, in course of time, the thing died out of folks' minds. I'm going to tell you now about what I said with my own eye. It was not there 6 months, and it was winter time, when the old lady took a last sickness. The doctor was afraid she might have took a fit of madness, as she did 15 years before, and was buckled up many a time in a strait waistcoat, which was the very leathern jerkin I said in the closet of my aunt's room. Well, she didn't. She pined, windowed, and went off, torfin, quiet enough, till a day or two before, her flitting, and then she took to rapping, and sometimes shirking in the bed. You'll think a robber had a knife to her throat, and she used to work out of the bed, not being strong enough. Then, to walk or stand, she'd fall on the floor, with her old wizened hands stretched before her face, scone still for mercy. You may guess I didn't go into the room, and I used to be shivering in my bed with fear, as her skirling and scraffing floor, and blaring out words that I'd make your skin turn blue. My aunt and Mrs. Wyvern, and Judith Squares, and a woman from Lexo, was always about her. At last she took fits, and they wore her out. The Sir Parson was there, prayed for her, but she was past praying with. I suppose I was right, but none could think there was much good in it. And so at long last she made her flitting, and it was over. And old Dame Crowl was shrouded and coffined, and Squire Shivnix was roped for, but he was away in France, and the delay was so long that to Sir and Doctor both agreed it would not do to keep her longer out of her place, and no one cared but just them two, my aunt and the rest of us from Applewell, to go to the burying. So the old lady of Applewell was laid in the vault under Lexo Church, and we lived up at the great house till such time as the squire should come to tell this will about us, and pay off such as he chose to discharge. I was put into another room, 2 doors away from what was Dame Crowl's chamber. After her death, and this thing happened the night before Squire Shivnix came to Applewell, the room I was in now was a large square chamber, covered with yak panels, but unfurnished except for my bed, which had no curtains to it, and a chair and a table, also, that looked nothing at all in such a big room, and the big looking glass. The old lady used to keep into and admire herself from head to heel, now that there was no mare on that walk, was put out of the way and stood against the wall in my room, for there was shifting of many things in my chambers, you may suppose, when she came to be coffined. The news had come that day that the squire was to be down next morning at Applewell, and not sorry was I, for I thought I was sure to be sent home again to my mother, and right glad was I, and I was thinking at time, thinking of her at hame, and my sister Janet, and the kitten, and the Pymac, and Trimmer and Tyke, and all the rest, and I got so fidgety I couldn't sleep. Rumours and the clock struck 12, me wide awake. The room was dark as pick. My back was turned to the door, and my eyes toward the wall opposite. Well, it could not be a full 12:15 when I sees the lighting on the wall before me, as if something took fire behind, and the shadows of the bed, and the chair, and my gown, and that was hanging from the wall, was dancing up and down on the ceiling beams and the yak panels, and I turns my head over my shoulder, thinking something must have gone afire. And what should I see, by Jan, but the likeness of the old Beldamere, bedizened out in her satins and velvets, on her dead body, simpering, with her eyes as wide as saucers, and her face like the fiend himself. 'Twas red light that rose about her in a fuffen low, as if her dress round her feet was blazing. She was driving on right for me, with her old shrivelled hands crooked as if she was going to claw me. I could not stir, but she passed me straight by, with a blast of cold air, and I stood her at the wall in the alcove, as my aunt used to call it, which was a recess where the state bed used to stand in old times, with the door open wide, and her hands groping in at something was there. I never said that door before. She turned round to me like a thing on a pivot, crying, grinning. All at once the room was dark. I was standing at the far side of the bed. I don't know how I got there, and I found my tongue at last, and if I did not wear a yallock, running down the gallery at last. If I did, and almost pulled Mrs. Wyvern's door off the hooks, frightened her half out of her wits. You may guess I did not sleep that night, and with the first light, down with me to my aunt, as fast as my 2 legs could carry me. Well, my aunt did not frump or flight me, as I thought she would. She held me by the hand and looked hard in my face all the time, and she told me not to be feared, and says she, had the appearance of key in its hand. Yes, says I, bringing it to mind. A big key and a queer brass handle. Stop a bit, says she, letting go my hand and opening the cupboard door. Was it like this? Says she, taking one out in her fingers and showing it to me with a dark look in her face. That was it, says I, quick enough. Are you sure? She says, turning it round. It's that, says I, and I felt like I was going to faint when I said it. Well, that will do, child, says she, softly thinking, and she locks it up again. The squire himself will be here today, before 12 o'clock, and you might tell him all. You must tell him all about it, says she, thinking. And I suppose I'll be leaving soon, so the best thing for the present is that you should go home this afternoon, and I'll look out another place for you when I can. Vain was I, you may guess, that well. My aunt packed up my things for me, and the £3 that was due to me to bring home, and Squire Crowl himself came down to Applewell that day, a handsome man, about 30 years old. It was the second time I see him. This was the first time he spoke to me. My aunt talked with him in the housekeeper's room, and I don't know what they said. I was a bit feared on the Squire. Yeah, he being a great gentleman down in Lexo. And I don't go near till I was called, and says he, smiling. What's this, you seen, child? It mun be a dream, for you know there's na sic a thing as a beau or a fret in the world. But whatever it was, my little maid, you sit you down and tell us all about it from first to last. Well, as soon as I made an end, he thought of it. Says he to my aunt. I mind the place well, and old Sir Oliver's time lame Windell told me there was a door in that recess to the left where the lassie dreamed she saw my grandmother open it. He was past 80 when he told me that, and I but a boy. It's 20 years since. The plate and jewels used to be kept there long ago before the iron closet was made in the attic's chamber, and he told me the key was a brass handle, and this, ye say, was found in the bottom of the chest where she kept her old fans. Now, would not it be a queer thing if we found some spoons or diamonds forgot there? Ye mun come up with us, lassie. Point to the very spot. Loth was I, and my heart in my mouth, and fast I held by my aunt's hand as I stepped into that awesome room, and showed them both how she came and passed me by, and the spot where she stood, where the door seemed to open. There was an old empty press against the wall then, and shoving it aside, sure enough there was the tracing of a door in the wainscot, and the keyhole stopped with wood, planed across as smooth as the rest. The joining of the door all stopped with putty and collar of yaks, but for the hinges that showed a bit when the press was shoved aside, you would not consait there was a door there at all. Ha! Says he, with a queer smile. This looks like it. It took some minutes with a small chisel and hammer to pick the bit of wood out of the keyhole. The key fitted, sure enough, with a strange twist and a long streak. The bolt went back and he pulled the door open. There was another door inside, stranger than the first. The latch was gone, and it opened easily. Inside was a narrow floor and walls and vault of bricks. We could not see what was in it, for it was dark as pitch. When my aunt had lighted the candle, the squire held it up and stepped in. My aunt stood on tiptoe, trying to look over his shoulder, and I did not see now. Ha ha, says the squire, stepping backwards. What's that? Give me the poker, quick, says he to my aunt, and as she went to the hearth I peeped inside his arm. I said, squat down in the far corner, a monkey or a frame on the chest, or else the mace shrivelled up. Wise and old wife that ever was sin on the earth. By Jan, said my aunt, as put the poker in his hand. She kicked by his shoulder, said the ill-favoured thing. Ah, care, sir, what you doing? Back with ye and shut to the door. But in place of that he steps in softly, with the poker pointed like a sword, and he gives it a poke, and down it tumbles together, here and now, in a heap of bones and dust. Little Mia on the hateful was the bairns of a child. Ah, the rest went to dust at the touch. He said not for a while, but he turns round the skull as it lay on the floor. Young as I was, as I can say it, I knew well enough what they was thinking on. "A dead cat," says he, pushing back and blowing out the candle and shutting in the door. "We'll come back, you and me, Mrs. Shutters. Look on the shelves by and by. I've other matters first to speak to you about. This little girl's gone home, you say. She has her wages, and I'm on making her a present," says he, patting my shoulder with his hand. And he did give her a good pound, and I went off to Elixir about an hour after, and sat home by the stagecoach, and fain was I to be home again. And I never saw old Dame Crowl Applewell, God be thanked, either in parents or in dream at after. But when I was grown by to be a woman, my aunt spent a day and night with me at Littleham, and she told me there was no doubt it was poor little boy that was missing so long since, was shut up to die there in the dark by that wicked Beldamere. Why, scowls, all his prayers, all his thumping could now be heard, and his hat was left by the water's edge. Whoever did it, to make believe he was drowned. The clothes at the first touch ran into a snuff of dust in the cell while the viand was found. There was a handful of jet buttons and a knife with the green handle, together with a couple of pennies the poor little fellow had in his pocket. I suppose, when he was decoyed and large, Scissors last saw the light, there was, among the squire's papers, a copy of the notice that was printed over after he was lost, when the old squire thought he might have run away or been took by gypsies, and it said he had a green hefted knife with him, and that his buttons were cut of jet. So that is, I have to say, concerning old Dame Crowl of Applewell House. Oh, excuse me, that was really difficult to read. Here's, I'm guessing, Dame Crowl. Yeah, old books with the pictures. She was driving on right for me with her own dishevelled hands, crooked as if she was going to claw me. Thank you for listening. I'm Lisa.